In the heart of Charleston, where the weight of history hangs heavy in the air, two seemingly untouchable police officers, confident in their unchecked power, find themselves at the center of a storm they never saw coming. It was supposed to be just another routine day at the courthouse. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow over the cobblestone streets. Inside the courthouse, the marble halls echoed with the footsteps of those who walked the path of justice, or so they thought. Judge Clara May, a woman who had spent over 3 decades navigating the twisted and often unjust legal system, entered the courthouse with an unshakable calm. At 62, she was a woman of quiet authority. Her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, sharp brown eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. She had seen it all, the corruption, the biases, the obstacles that had tried to keep her down. As the first black woman to sit on Charleston's highest court, Clara had learned to be resilient, to navigate the subtle and not-so-subtle microaggressions that came her way. But on this day, something felt different. Something was off. Clara's instincts, honed over years of experience, were on high alert. As she made her way through the courthouse, she could feel the tension in the air. She had faced many battles, but this one felt like it was about to be bigger than any she had ever fought before. She was met by a clerk outside her courtroom, whose strained smile didn't go unnoticed. "Good morning, Judge," the clerk said, though the word seemed forced. "Officer Boone's already inside," the clerk added, barely hiding the anxiety in his voice. "Boone." Clara's jaw tightened. Sergeant Travis Boone, a cop whose legacy in Charleston law enforcement was built on arrogance and unchecked power. A man who had gotten away with so much for so long. Someone who thought he could walk into her courtroom, disrespect her, and face no consequences. But Clara wasn't just any judge. She wasn't someone who could be overlooked or intimidated. As she stepped into the courtroom, her gaze immediately locked onto Boone, who, despite his years in the force, failed to recognize the woman standing before him. He didn't see her as the judge. Not yet, but he would. The room was still. The moment Clara entered, the usual hum of the courthouse seemed to stop. The noise, the chatter, the shuffle of papers, everything faded into a heavy silence. The eyes of those present turned toward her, not just because she was a judge, but because there was something about her that commanded attention. She didn't need a robe to stand tall. Her presence alone was enough to fill the space with authority. But that wasn't the case for Sergeant Travis Boone. Boone sat there at the front of the courtroom, exuding a confidence that could only come from a man who believed his badge made him untouchable. He didn't acknowledge Clara when she entered, his eyes instead fixed on the defendant, a teenager sitting nervously in the dock. Boone was a picture of arrogance, his posture rigid, his expression one of disdain. He hadn't even looked up when Clara walked in, not yet aware of who was standing before him. The clerk, visibly uncomfortable, whispered to Clara as she made her way toward the bench. "Good morning, Judge Mays. Officer Boone's already inside." Clara nodded, her jaw tightening at the mention of Boone's name. She knew him well, but more than that, she knew the kind of man he was. His record spoke for itself. Too many complaints, too many reports swept under the rug. A legacy built on the kind of power that only comes from being part of a system that turned a blind eye to his wrongdoings. He had walked into that courtroom expecting the same old routine, the same unquestioned control he had over everyone and everything. But Clara was not just anyone. As she approached the bench, the tension in the room thickened. The subtle change in the air was almost palpable. The defendant, a skinny, frightened teenager, shrunk back in his seat, looking for any escape, while Boone continued to stare ahead, oblivious. Clara paused for a brief moment, her eyes scanning the room, taking in every detail, reading the undercurrents that everyone else seemed too distracted to notice. It was only then, as she took a step forward, that Boone finally registered her presence. His eyes flicked up, but only for a brief second. That's when the confusion set in. He blinked, not quite understanding. She wasn't in her robe. She wasn't seated behind the bench like every other judge he'd ever encountered. Who was she? A clerk? A bailiff? He didn't know, but his reaction was enough. The shift in the room was undeniable. Clara stood there, calm, composed, her gaze never leaving his. "You," she said, her voice even, but sharp, like a blade cutting through the growing tension. "Did you just strike me in this courtroom?" The words hit Boone like a freight train. His mouth opened and closed, his mind scrambling for a response, but none came. He swallowed, the words lodged in his throat, unable to form into a coherent excuse. He had thought he could dismiss her, just another figure in the room, one who didn't matter. But now, with the eyes of the courtroom upon him, with the weight of Clara's unwavering gaze, he realized he had made a grave mistake. Boone stammered, his voice faltering as he struggled to find the words. "I didn't know who you were." The words hung in the air, weak and pathetic. He could see the room starting to shift, the tension growing as the realization dawned on everyone else. This wasn't just a courtroom drama. This was something bigger, something that could unravel everything. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't flounder or give him the space he expected. No, she was steady, unmoving, her voice cutting through the air with a quiet power that left no room for excuses. "Did you put your hands on me?" she repeated, her tone now even sharper, more insistent. Boone shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence beginning to crumble. The momentary confusion gave way to defiance, his arrogance still lingering, but it was tinged with uncertainty now. He wasn't sure what to do next. He had miscalculated, and he knew it. The courtroom was watching, and this time, there was no one to shield him, no one to deflect the consequences of his actions. I was doing my job," he finally muttered, his voice shaking just a little, trying to justify his actions. "That kid," he pointed to the defendant. "He's a thug. I caught him with spray paint. He's guilty, a criminal." Clara's eyes didn't soften. They remained as sharp as ever, her gaze unwavering. She didn't react to his words, didn't allow his attempt to deflect the attention from his assault on her to land. "That," Clara said, her voice suddenly thunderous, as the gavel slammed down with a force that rattled the room, "is not an excuse to put your hands on me." The courtroom fell silent. Every eye locked on Clara. This wasn't just about a single incident anymore. It was about something much larger, a confrontation between the abuse of power and the unyielding force of justice. Clara's words reverberated through the room, echoing in the minds of everyone present. Boone tried to protest, but Clara cut him off. "You do not get to justify assault by pointing fingers at a juvenile defendant," she said, her voice steady but full of authority. "You don't get to act like you're above the law." Her gaze swept across the room, locking eyes with the prosecutor, the defense attorney, the clerk, and the few spectators who were lucky enough to witness the turning of a tide. They were witnessing a moment that could change everything. A moment where power was being challenged, where the truth was finally rising to the surface. "Mr. Harper," Clara said, turning to the clerk with a calm authority, "please enter this into the record. This happened in front of witnesses, and it was all caught on camera." The silence in the room deepened, almost suffocating. Boone's defiance faltered again, his eyes flicking nervously from Clara to the gallery, then back again. He was trapped, and he knew it. Clara, unshaken, stood behind the bench, her presence commanding the room. "You've spent your career hiding behind your badge, Sergeant Boone, but today that badge doesn't protect you. It holds you accountable." Boone could feel the walls closing in around him, the same walls that had always protected him, that had always allowed him to act with impunity, were now threatening to close in and crush him. This wasn't just about an assault in the courtroom. This was about the system finally being held to account, about the power structures that had enabled men like him to abuse their authority for far too long. The room was no longer just a courtroom. It had become a battleground for justice, and Clara May had just declared war. The gavel's echo had barely faded when Clara's next move shattered any remaining doubt. She didn't just settle for reining in Officer Boone in that moment. She made sure the world knew the truth of what had transpired. There would be no sweeping this under the rug. Clara was done waiting for the system to change from within. She would make it change, no matter the cost. The room was still. It seemed like time itself had stopped, frozen in the wake of Clara's demand for accountability. Clara's eyes didn't leave Boone's for a second. her expression unwavering. The courtroom watched, breathless, as she made the final declaration. Internal Affairs is being notified. I will personally submit a formal complaint to the Attorney General's office, and I will not stop until this is investigated. Boone's face drained of color. It wasn't fear that gripped him now, but something far more insidious: realization. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. The power he had long held so tightly, the badge that had always been his shield, had become his ball and chain. Clara didn't give him the luxury of slipping away with a quiet apology. No, she was bringing the fight to him, and it would be a fight he couldn't win. Her words hit harder than any slap. Clara had set the wheels of justice in motion, and there was no turning back. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, like a wave rising to the breaking point. Clara turned, her mind already calculating her next steps. The defendant, still shaken and unsure, seemed almost to disappear into the back of the courtroom, as if he, too, recognized that this moment wasn't about him anymore. He was just a backdrop to something far more important, a pivotal moment where justice would be defined. Not for him, but for everyone who had ever been pushed to the margins. The prosecutor, visibly stunned by the turn of events, cleared his throat and spoke in a voice that barely cut through the tension. "Do you want to proceed with the docket, Your Honor?" Clara turned slowly, her gaze as sharp as the blade of a knife. "I will decide that momentarily," she said, each word carrying the weight of a woman who had seen too many corrupt systems thrive unchecked. "But first, I need to make something very clear." She let the words hang in the air, charging the room with the kind of electricity that no one in that courtroom would ever forget. "I've seen officers like you before, Sergeant Boone. The kind who walk into a courtroom already assuming everyone in it is beneath you. The kind who says, 'I didn't know,' when what they really mean is, 'I didn't care.'" A chill swept through the room as Boone's eyes flicked nervously to the prosecutor, who was now visibly uncomfortable under Clara's unwavering stare. No one moved. No one spoke. Clara had become the embodiment of justice. A justice that didn't whisper but roared. "This," Clara continued, her voice low but firm, "is the moment the system starts to crack. I've spent my life watching men like you misuse their power, expecting everyone to remain silent, to pretend that what they do behind the badge doesn't matter." Her eyes narrowed, locking on Boone. "But not today." Her words were a dam breaking, flooding the courtroom with a force that could not be ignored. And it wasn't just Boone who felt it. The room was alive with a kind of energy, a shared understanding that this moment was pivotal. Clara was about to take down something much larger than a rogue officer. She was about to expose the rot hidden beneath the surface of a system built to protect those who didn't deserve protection. Boone tried again, his voice now defensive and weak. "You're overreacting. I was just doing my job." Clara's response was swift, unforgiving. "Doing your job? You don't get to hide behind that excuse anymore. You don't get to assault a judge and call it doing your job." Clara's words cut through him, leaving him floundering for an explanation that would never come. She had already stripped away his excuses, his justifications, his sense of entitlement. He had nowhere left to hide. As Boone sputtered, Clara moved with practiced ease. She didn't flinch or waver. With the room's eyes still on her, she stood from the bench, her voice rising with a steady, confident clarity. "In accordance with the authority vested in me as a circuit judge for the state of South Carolina," she began, each word deliberate, powerful, "and under Title 16, Chapter 3, Article 1 of the South Carolina Code of Laws, I am ordering a formal investigation into this assault. Sergeant Boone, you will be removed from this courtroom immediately. I will see to it that the necessary steps are taken." The finality of her words hung in the air, the weight of them settling heavily on everyone in the room. Boone's shoulders sagged, but there was no remorse in his eyes, only a flicker of panic, a recognition that his empire of unchecked power had crumbled in an instant as Clara motioned for the bailiff to escort Boone out. She turned toward the clerk. "Please enter this incident into the record," she said, her voice unwavering. "This happened in front of witnesses, and it was all captured on camera. This cannot be ignored." Outside, the murmur of conversations began to swell, and Clara could feel the storm that was about to break. She had made her stand, but the real battle was just beginning. Clara knew the system would fight back. It always did. The same system that had allowed Boone to rise to power, the same system that had failed so many others, was not going to simply roll over and accept that it was broken. As Clara settled back into her seat, her thoughts raced. She had no illusions about what was to come. The mayor would call, the police union would rally, and the press would certainly descend. They would try to smear her, silence her, make her regret every word she had spoken. But Clara had made her choice. She wasn't afraid. And this time, it wasn't just about one officer. It was about the whole system, the corruption, the abuse of power, the inequality. It all had to come to light. When Clara stepped into her chambers later that day, the weight of what had just transpired hit her like a wave. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't answer it. The messages would be there when she was ready. For now, Clara May sat at her desk, took out a legal pad, and began to write. This was only the beginning. The investigation was already underway. But as Clara knew all too well, investigations were slow. Justice, however, had no time to waste. She would move faster than they ever expected. And she would make sure that the truth would be impossible to ignore. The next few hours felt like an eternity, each moment dragging on longer than the last. Clara May sat in her chambers, the weight of the day's events still heavy on her shoulders. Her hands, though steady, trembled slightly as she picked up the legal pad again. The paper before her was filled with notes, facts, and strategies. She had already begun to outline the steps for the investigation, but she knew it wasn't enough. She had to dig deeper. The system that had allowed Officer Boone to thrive for so long wouldn't just crumble from a single confrontation. No, she had to dig into the heart of it, unearth every dark corner, and expose the rot. Clara didn't wait for the official channels. She knew better than anyone that the system had its ways of covering things up, things that would vanish in a cloud of bureaucracy if left unchecked. This was personal now, not just about her, but about the countless people who had fallen victim to the same unjust system. She was no longer just a judge. She was a beacon for truth, a symbol of defiance in the face of an entrenched power structure. The phone in her hand buzzed again. Another voicemail, another message she didn't need to hear. She already knew what it would say: warnings, threats, pleas to back off. But Clara had no intention of backing off. Not now, not ever. She picked up the phone, dialing the number she knew by heart. Reyes, she said when the line picked up. I need you to start digging into Boone's history. I want everything. Every complaint. Every report. Every incident. Don't leave anything out. If the department's hiding something, we're going to expose it. On the other end of the line, Reyes, her trusted assistant, responded without hesitation. Understood, Judge. I'm on it. Clara set the phone down and rubbed her eyes, feeling the exhaustion creeping in. But she didn't allow herself a moment of weakness. There was too much at stake. The investigation had to move quickly, and she had no time to waste. An hour later, Reyes called back, his voice tight with urgency. Judge, you're right. We've got a problem here. There are complaints going back years, 5, maybe more, but they've been buried. The files are incomplete, and in some cases, the evidence is gone. Clara's heart sank. She had suspected it, of course. She had been in the system long enough to know that this was the kind of thing that always happened. But hearing it confirmed still hit her hard. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. I knew it, she muttered to herself. I knew they were hiding something. Reyes continued, his voice quieter now. There are also discrepancies in Boone's record. Some things don't add up. It looks like he was being protected by someone high up. But I'll need more time to trace the connections. It's a tangled web, Judge. Clara's mind raced. She knew she couldn't let this slide. The corruption went deeper than Boone, deeper than anyone realized. He was a symptom of a much larger problem, and if she didn't pull at the threads now, it would only continue. She had to bring everything to light. I need you to keep going, Reyes, push harder. And if you find anything suspicious, anything that even remotely smells like a cover-up, you bring it to me, immediately." She ended the call and leaned back in her chair, her thoughts spinning. She had always known that power was like a parasite. It fed off the weak, and it always thrived in the darkness. But now that darkness was closing in around her, the system was coming for her, and it wouldn't stop until she was silenced. But Clara was no stranger to adversity. She had spent her entire life fighting for what was right, and she wasn't going to let fear stand in her way now. She couldn't, not when there was so much at stake. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Clara found herself standing before her desk, flipping through a file that Reyes had managed to track down. The document was thick, filled with reports, testimonies, and dates that painted a troubling picture. Boone had been involved in countless incidents, each more serious than the last. From excessive force complaints to questionable arrests, it was clear that he had been operating with impunity for years. But the deeper Clara dug, the more she realized that Boone was just a small piece of the puzzle. There were others, people within the department who had protected him, covered for him, and allowed his behavior to go unchecked. Clara's stomach twisted as she read through the file. It wasn't just about one rogue officer anymore. This was about a system that had failed, that had allowed corruption to fester and grow unchecked. The reports had been buried. The evidence had been tampered with. And the people who had sworn to protect the public had been protecting each other instead. But the most shocking revelation came when Clara stumbled upon a series of emails, hidden deep within the department's archives. They were from a name she knew all too well, Ada Ramsey, the prosecutor who had been involved in Boone's cases more than once. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she read through the correspondence, her pulse quickening. Ramsey had been working closely with Boone, even going so far as to offer him legal assistance when his actions came under scrutiny. And it didn't stop there. Clara's eyes narrowed as she continued reading. The emails painted a clear picture. Ramsey had been complicit in the cover-up, helping to protect Boone from any serious consequences. Her hands shook as she reached for the phone again, her heart racing. She couldn't believe what she was reading, but she knew it was true. Ada Ramsey had been playing both sides just like Boone, and now it was time for the truth to come out. Clara called Reyes immediately, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "Reyes, I need everything you can find on Ada Ramsey. I want her entire history with Boone, every case, every deal, everything. This is bigger than we thought." Reyes didn't hesitate. "I'll get on it right now, Judge, but you need to be careful. These people are dangerous." Clara's eyes darkened. "I'm not afraid." As the evening wore on, Clara sat alone in her office, the weight of the discovery settling on her like a heavy blanket. She had uncovered the first real piece of the puzzle, the truth about Boone's connection to the powerful figures within the justice system. And now she knew what she had to do. The investigation was just beginning, but Clara was already one step ahead. The game had changed. No longer would the corrupt get to hide in the shadows. The light was shining on them, and there was no turning back now. The days following Clara's discovery felt like a whirlwind, each one more tense and charged than the last. Word spread quickly. It wasn't just the courtroom where the rumblings began. Now the entire courthouse, and soon the entire city, would feel the tremors of the storm Clara had unleashed. The truth had a way of spreading like wildfire, and soon everyone, from the highest echelons of power to the most marginalized citizens, knew the name Boone. Clara could feel the pressure mounting. The mayor called again, the chief of police, the media, relentless in their pursuit of the latest scandal. She ignored the phone calls, the emails, the texts. She had seen this before, attempts to silence the truth with threats, with political maneuvering, with media spin. But Clara was no stranger to pressure. She had endured it her whole life. Clara stood tall, focused. She had already made her decision. There was no going back now. Boone's downfall was just the beginning, and she had no intention of stopping. Her office had become a war room. Files piled high on her desk, each one containing another piece of the puzzle that was Boone's career. Every misstep, every cover-up, every corrupt deal. Clara had expected the usual pattern. The department would circle the wagons, cover their tracks, and bury the evidence. But this time they were caught off guard. Clara's investigation had pulled the veil back from the darkness they had tried to keep hidden as Clara sifted through the evidence with an almost mechanical precision. Her phone buzzed again. Reyes's name flashed on the screen. Clara didn't hesitate to pick up. "Judge," Reyes's voice crackled through the line. "You need to hear this. We found more. A lot more." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She leaned forward, her mind racing. "What did you find?" "There's a deeper connection between Boone and the prosecutor Ada Ramsey. It goes beyond just protecting him on cases. We found financial transactions, large sums of money funneled through shell companies, and Ramsey's name is all over it." Clara's stomach churned. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was another blow. Ada Ramsey, the trusted prosecutor, had been complicit in the corruption. She had used her position to shield Boone, to protect him from the very accountability he deserved. But now there was no way to hide. The truth was too powerful. "How much money?" Clara asked, her voice tight with barely contained fury. "It's significant, Judge. Enough to make even the highest ranks in the department nervous. We're talking about a cover-up that goes all the way to the top." Clara's grip on the phone tightened, her knuckles turning white. "Keep digging, Reyes. I want everything: emails, transactions, records. I'll expose every last piece of this." Clara's mind raced as she ended the call. The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about one corrupt officer anymore. This was a full-blown conspiracy, one that stretched across the police department, the prosecution, and possibly even the political establishment. Boone was just a pawn in a much larger game, but he was also the key to unraveling it all. The following week, Clara received another bombshell. A former officer who had worked alongside Boone in the department reached out, offering to cooperate with the investigation. His name was Officer Carter, and he had left the force under suspicious circumstances a year ago. Clara knew this could be the break she needed. Clara met Carter in a small, dimly lit cafe, away from the prying eyes of the courthouse. His nervous energy was palpable, but Clara could see the genuine fear in his eyes. "I've been waiting for someone to come along and expose what was really happening in that department," he said, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "Boone's not the only one who's dirty. There are others higher up than you think. The corruption runs deep." Clara leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "What do you know?" "Ramsey's not just protecting Boone," Carter continued. "She's been taking money from organized crime. And Boone, he's been working with them. The whole department's been turning a blind eye. They all had a hand in it. But Boone was the enforcer, the one they sent to intimidate anyone who got too close." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. The department had become a haven for criminals, a place where law enforcement turned its back on justice. But now it was all coming to light, and Clara would be the one to make sure it didn't fade back into the shadows. The investigation hit a fever pitch after Carter's testimony. The walls that had once shielded the corrupt were crumbling. Boone's colleagues, once protected by the unspoken code of silence, were beginning to crack. Internal Affairs launched a full-scale investigation, with Clara's testimony at the center. She had set the wheels of justice in motion, and they couldn't be stopped now. The media, once skeptical, now found themselves in a feeding frenzy. News outlets, both local and national, picked up the story, each one adding fuel to the fire. Clara was no longer just a judge. She had become a symbol of courage, of defiance against a system that had tried to silence her. The more the investigation unfolded, the more people began to take notice. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, chanting Clara's name. The citizens who had once felt powerless were now rallying behind her. But not everyone was on her side. The pressure was mounting from every direction. The mayor's office, desperate to avoid scandal, reached out with one final attempt to stop Clara's pursuit of justice. "Clara," the mayor's voice was thick with urgency, "you need to back off. This is getting out of hand. It's tearing the city apart." Clara's response was unwavering. "This city needs to face the truth. I will not stop." not until justice is served. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the entire police department had been infected with corruption. But it wasn't just the officers who were complicit. Ada Ramsey, who had once been a trusted figure in the legal community, was arrested for her role in the conspiracy. The charges were severe: bribery, obstruction of justice, and more. But it was clear to Clara that the fight was far from over. Boone had fallen, Ramsey had been exposed, but there were still so many unanswered questions. In the end, the investigation didn't just bring down a corrupt officer. It toppled an entire system. Boone's conviction was the first domino to fall, but it was Clara's relentless pursuit of truth that had brought the entire network of corruption to its knees. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become a battleground for justice, and Clara had emerged victorious. But Clara knew that this victory was just the beginning. The fight for justice was ongoing. The system had been broken, but it was still alive, still fighting to protect itself. Clara's work wasn't done. Not yet. But for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself a moment of relief. Justice had been served, and for now, that was enough. The city of Charleston had changed forever. The courtroom that had once echoed with the injustice of corrupt systems now stood as a symbol of transformation. Clara May, with unwavering determination, had sparked a movement that transcended the walls of her courthouse and rippled out to every corner of society. She had done what many believed was impossible. She had brought down not just one officer, but an entire network of corruption that had been allowed to flourish for far too long. As Clara stood in her office, the weight of the past few weeks settling on her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet pride. It wasn't the kind of pride that came with personal accolades or recognition. No, Clara's pride came from something much deeper. She had done what was right, regardless of the cost, and now the truth had set a new course for justice. The courtroom, once a place of fear for so many, had become a beacon of hope. People who had long suffered in silence, those who had been victims of a broken system, now had the courage to speak out. Clara had shown them that their voices mattered, that no matter how powerful the forces against them might seem, justice could prevail. She had proven that one person, armed with integrity and an unshakable sense of what is right, could make a difference. But the work wasn't over. Clara knew that. She knew the fight for justice was a continuous journey. The systems of power that had been exposed in Charleston were not unique to one city. They were entrenched in every corner of society. The corruption, the greed, and the abuse of power that had allowed Boone and others to thrive were not isolated incidents. They were part of a broader, systemic issue that required constant vigilance and unrelenting courage to dismantle. And so, Clara continued her fight, not just for Charleston, but for every city, every community where injustice still reigned. Her voice, once just the authority of a judge, had now become the voice of a movement that called for accountability, transparency, and the kind of justice that wasn't afraid to confront uncomfortable truths. As the investigation concluded and Boone was convicted, Clara addressed the public for the first time in a way she never had before. Standing before a crowd of supporters, journalists, and fellow activists, she shared her vision for the future. A future where justice was not a privilege for the few, but a right for all. Today, Clara began, her voice steady but full of passion. We stand on the edge of a new beginning. A beginning where no one is above the law. A beginning where the power of truth cannot be silenced. What we've done here in Charleston is not just a victory for me or for the victims of this system. It's a victory for every single person who has been silenced by fear. It's a victory for everyone who has ever been told their voice doesn't matter. Her words rang out, carrying far beyond the courthouse steps, touching the hearts of people who had long since lost faith in the justice system. Clara's courage had ignited a spark, and now that spark was spreading, lighting the way for others to follow. People across the country began to take note of Clara's actions. They saw that one person, armed with truth and integrity, could change the course of an entire city. And they knew it was possible for them too. Clara continued, her eyes scanning the crowd, her tone unwavering. This isn't just about what happened in this courtroom. This is about all of us, standing together, demanding the justice that has been denied for so long. It's about every person who has ever faced discrimination, corruption, or abuse of power. This movement is for you. It's for all of us. The applause that followed was deafening. It wasn't just admiration for Clara's work. It was a collective expression of hope, of belief that change was not only possible but happening. Clara had shown the world that justice was not a passive pursuit. It was something to be fought for, something to be earned, and something that, when pursued with relentless commitment, could not be denied. But the movement didn't stop there. Clara knew that the next step was to ensure that the systemic changes she had fought for would continue long after she had left the courthouse. She couldn't be the only one standing up against corruption. She couldn't be the only one demanding change. The movement needed to grow, to spread, to inspire others to take action. And so, Clara turned her attention to the next generation. She began working with local organizations to create programs that would educate young people about the importance of justice, equality, and standing up against corruption. She traveled across the country, speaking at universities, community centers, and town halls, urging everyone, especially young people, to find their voice and use it to fight for what was right. "I believe in the power of young people," Clara said in one of her speeches, her eyes alight with conviction. "I believe in your ability to make change. The future is in your hands, and I'm here to tell you that you can make a difference. Don't let anyone ever tell you that you're too young, too small, too insignificant to make an impact. The world is waiting for your voice." Clara's work inspired thousands. Her story, one of courage, perseverance, and unwavering commitment to truth, spread across social media. People began to share her message, to rally around her cause. They knew that they had a role to play in the fight for justice. Clara's movement was no longer just hers. It had become a national movement, one that inspired a new generation of activists to rise up and demand change. As the years went on, the impact of Clara's actions continued to resonate. The systems of power that had once seemed unbreakable were now being challenged everywhere. People began to speak out against corruption in their own communities, holding those in power accountable. Clara's story had sparked a chain reaction that was changing the world. And now, it's your turn to be a part of this journey. To stand with Clara, to stand with truth, to stand with justice. The fight is far from over, but it's a fight we can win, together if you believe in the power of truth, in the strength of justice, and in the importance of holding those in power accountable, then join us. Subscribe to our channel, share this message with your friends, and help spread the word. Together, we can continue the fight for justice. And make sure that the light Clara sparked continues to shine for generations to come. Clara's movement has only just begun. And with you by our side, there's no telling how far we can go.